Hello, hello, and welcome to Keep It Colorful. If you're interested in learning acrylic painting techniques and some drawing, you are in the right place. My name is Jessie, and I teach 2 new acrylic painting tutorials every single weekend. And in today's class, we are going to paint this snowy owl. For today's lesson, you're going to learn how to mix neutral colors and use them effectively to create a winter landscape featuring our snowy owl. So this class is really going to focus on understanding and applying value, which is light to dark tones to create contrast between white elements in a snow-covered scene. We're going to work step by step together to draw and build this owl up in layers, the fence and the surrounding atmosphere while exploring how to make your whites really pop and stand out in a snowy setting. So if you're ready, let's get started. Today's class is live, so feel free to say hello. Let me know where you're tuning in from today. Here in Cape Breton in Canada, we are in the middle of a blizzard, and looking out my window, it actually looks just like this. For supplies, I'm going to show you the ones that I've used, but please feel free to go rogue and use whatever you have on hand. I've poured out my paint colors here, and I'm going to show you up close the colors that I have poured out. And let's start at the end here. I've used some Mars Black. I'm going to go to the next color you see here. Phthalo Blue. Next up, Ultramarine Blue. And here, Burnt Umber Brown. We'll also be using a little bit of Prism Violet and Cadmium Yellow Medium Hue. I've poured those out right here and here. These are going to be for the eye, any of the warm browns you see, as well as in the grasses. And we have some browns actually mixed throughout the snowy field as well. Of course, we are working with a lot of light tints of all of these colors, so we have plenty of titanium white. I'm using my favorite paints for teaching classes. These are Liquitex Basics. This is a professional artist line of paint, one of the oldest out there. And this is their student line, so they have wonderful coverage, light fastness, but they're quite affordable too. So if you have these in your area, and you're new to painting, I think you'll really love this particular brand of paints. Now, you'll also need something to paint on, and I'm working on a stretched canvas today, size 12 by 12 inches. Let's get into the brushes, the tools we're going to use to create all of these lovely, lovely textures. So the brushes I've used, I'll hold them up close, and because different brands of brushes, sizes are not synced up between brands. So a size 12 flat in one company might be huge and it might be small in another one. So I always hold them up close so you can approximate the shape and size. We'll be using a 12 flat. This is a rectangular shaped brush and it's just shy of 1 inch wide. Number 8, Filbert. A number 6, Bright. For our round details, I have a little 0 round brush. This is so helpful for the eyes and the beak in our owl today. Another fantastic brush for long, skinny details, like in these really curving grasses, is a script liner. You'll notice that this essentially looks like a extra long bristled round brush. Because it's so long, it soaks up paint, and the more paint it can hold, the longer it can travel. So this one really travels wonderfully for these long grasses. I highly recommend you have a script liner. It is a fantastic brush for long, skinny lines and textures. For building the basic shapes today, we'll be using a 1/4 inch flat. Like that first brush, it's a rectangle, but this one's only 1/4 of an inch wide. Now let's get into the fun texturizing tools. For this class, I used a variety of wisp brushes, spelled W-I-S-P. These are regular brushes, either filbert or flat in shape, but they have segments cut out of the bristles. So they create really fun, streaky, organic textures. I use both the tips and the sides of these brushes for various effects. Even if you have just one wisp brush, play with it today. If you don't have one, don't worry. You can get the same effects with a round brush or even a fan brush. Speaking of fan brushes, I've pulled out my 2 favorites. This one here is a bristly fan brush. It can be found in the oil painting section of your local art store, and it has a lovely bristly texture. This one here is an acrylic fan, which doesn't have quite the bristly texture, but it has separation in the bristles. So again, little streaky textures, a long, fine, straight edge with a gentle curve. So think about the shape of this curved brush makes excellent work of the curvy little feathers and spots on the owl's plumage. This one I have here is the very small size. It's called a 10-0. It is barely as wide as my thumb. It's so cute and wonderful to work with. This one is an Artist Loft brush. It's quite cheap. I've seen it all over art stores over both Canada and the US. So definitely pick one of those up. Lastly, I have a few more tools that I've used here today. We have some soft blending to do in this landscape. So I recommend you have a mop brush. Looks like a makeup brush. Yes, you can use makeup brushes, but my favorite are the artist brushes here. I've used mop brushes from all over. There's probably not one that I haven't really explored yet. They come in different sizes. I like having a bigger one and a smaller one, but even if you just have one, it's going to be great for softening colors, but also look at the tip. The texture of a brush, when you look at the tip, will really indicate the marks you can make with it. So this is great for kind of also stamping with, not just blending, so pulling in the trees. If you have a mop brush, grab it. Also, fun and squishy little sea sponges. You can get these at your art store where they call them art sponges, quote unquote. They are just sea sponges, of course. You can get these at any like drugstore, local pharmacy. Boop, boop. Great texturizing tools. I also pulled out a palette knife today. It doesn't matter the shape of the blade of your palette knife, because what we're after is the edge. Look at that skinny edge. When I turn it, it almost disappears. It's so skinny and fine. My favorite palette knives are metal because of their durability and their flexibility. You don't get this flexibility in a plastic knife. They're fantastic. So this can also go around curves and create amazing thin lines. I use this in the fence, and I used it to do a technique I'm going to show you called scumbling, where we rub it to kind of create texture in the snow. I used it in the trees, in the grasses, and I dolloped on really thick, almost impasto style paint, where you apply it in thick daubs in the snow on the railing. So if you have a palette knife, you can use it. But of course, if you don't have one, it will not stop you from painting along today. You can just use different brushes. All right, just a couple more supplies that I wanted to show you for today's class. You'll want to have a big jar of water for cleaning your brushes, and we add water right to our paint when we want a more runny and fluid consistency. Also, a paper towel or an old rag for drying the brushes when we want them to be dry. Now, finally, we are going to draw this owl together. It breaks down into perfect little circle shapes and just a couple of curves. I very much advocate for practicing the drawing element on some scrap paper. So here coffee stained book and a regular pencil so we can practice drawing the owl together before we put it into the painting. If you want to practice along with me, grab some scrap paper and a pencil. And then we're going to sketch our owl onto our composition. So there will be a small drawing element today. For sketching on a painting, you have a lot of different things that you can use. You can, of course, use a regular pencil, which you will have to erase. So this is just a regular old school pencil. If you've got kids, you can even nab their pencils. This white one is one of my favorites. It's a chalk pencil. You can use chalk or charcoal, and you don't have to erase that. You can just wipe it off like chalk on a sidewalk. This is also charcoal. The black charcoal, you're not going to be able to wash off like the white one because it's super pigmented. But if you need a really dark line, you can use dark charcoal or a darker pencil like a 7B artist pencil. If you have watercolor pencils, those are lovely as well because you don't have to erase them. You can just wipe the watercolor off. So really any pencil, chalk, charcoal, sewing pencil. Avoid wax pencils like pencil crayons because the pencil crayon wax repels acrylic paint, which is why you cannot paint with acrylic paint over top of oil paint, right? That it will make it peel off of the surface eventually. So one more supply. You don't have to have it. I paint with this in every single painting I do. I have a spray bottle, and don't set it to the jet setting. Turn the nozzle so it's more of a mist setting. I use this to slow the paint from drying down on the palette. So I'll just put it on a mist setting and lightly mist the top of my paints about every 15 minutes to keep them pliable for the couple of hours we'll be painting together today. And that is it for supplies. Oh, one more. I almost forgot my trusty blow dryer. So the spray bottle is great when you want to slow down the dry time of your paint. Sometimes we want to speed it up, like in between a background layer and a foreground layer. So I use this tiny little travel size blow dryer every day in my painting practice to speed up the layering process. Okay, now that is it for supplies. Let's go ahead and start step one. We'll be working background to foreground. So we're going to mix up a range of neutral colors. If you love color mixing, get ready. Grab a bright brush, like a little square shaped brush like this. We're going to mix our first neutral color using ultramarine blue and brown. This works best with ultramarine, not phthalo blue. So I want you to try this with me. Take 1 scoop of ultramarine blue. Gently wipe off your brush. 1 scoop of brown. So equal parts, blend them together. You're going to get a color that is like black. Actually, I might mix a little extra of this. So I put 2 nice scoops of the brown and the blue. And when we mix this together, you're going to get essentially a black color, a homemade black, ultramarine blue and burnt umber brown. We want a nice range of soft neutrals together today. So look at that, it's black. Now, should have poured my white a little further away. Okay. So now we're going to mix some white with a little bit of this gray, this homemade black, and look, it makes almost a perfect gray that looks just like if you mix black in there. So let me do a little swatch of this kind of medium gray. I'm going to show you how you can create your very own custom warm grays or cool grays. So here is this color with just a little bit of white. We can get a really nice charcoal gray. And then here's the color with a lot of white. So we've got a range, dark, mid-tone, and highlight tones. Look at that. So that's just ultramarine blue and brown. If we want a warm gray, so here in the snow you can see both bluish grays, and kind of warm brown putty grays. So if I wanted to make this color more blue, I'll add a little bit of the ultramarine blue to the medium gray, and look, we get a bluish gray. And now if I add a little bit of blue to the light gray, we'll get a light bluish gray. Not saturated, this would still be considered a gray color, but it's very much a bluish gray. And same if we want to warm it up, a little brown into that medium gray. And we've got a beautiful brownish medium gray. That's like these, the brownish gray, bluish gray, neutral gray. A little bit of brown into that light gray. I love this color. Kind of a warm putty gray. So we've got a range of these grays, starting with an equal mix of this is the equal mix of the ultramarine and brown, the bluish gray, and here vertically the warm gray. So these are some of the colors we'll be working with in our color palette today. There we go. I want you to mix a little bit of each of these. When you're done, let's go ahead and take a lot of white and mix in just a tiny little bit of brown. It's going to be one of our highlight colors. And by the way, if you're not used to using a palette knife, you can mix with a brush or a knife. To clean a palette knife, you just wipe it off. You don't need to use any water. And then I want you to take a nice dollop of white and add just a little bit of ultramarine blue. And then I want you to take some white and add a little bit of phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is the very teal blue. So if you look in the foreground here under the kind of the shadow under the fence, this is more of a teal blue. I'll hold up close. So that phthalo blue is more this teal blue here. And up here in the tree, you might see more of a purpley blue. That's the ultramarine blue. Okay, let's take a peek at all these colors separately. I want to say this about the phthalo blue. It is really powerful for its tinting strength, which means you need much less of it. This tiny little dollop of blue for, I would say, about 30 times more white is going to get you that pastel phthalo blue. And I'm going to show you these light values up close on our little color swatch here. So these will be our kind of medium and dark values. For our highlights, here we go. I'll put them in a little square over here. Here's just a plain brown with white, really light color, okay? Warm colors tend to pop forward in a color scheme. Cool colors recede. Here's our highlight ultramarine. So these really light colors we're going to use in the snowy field. And here's our highlight phthalo blue. Right here. Like a little robin's egg blue there. All right, so this is our color scheme for today. Let's get started. Rinse off your bright brush. Come into one of the light grays you made. I don't care if it's a blue gray or a warm gray or a neutral gray. Just make it a light gray color, okay? And I want you to make a little grid on your painting. If you have a ruler, we can mark things off accurately, but we're going to break this into thirds. So for me on this 12 by 12, thirds would be coming down 4 and 8 inches. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can just freehand thirds if you want. Okay, so about each of these sections on a 12 by 12 is going to be about 4 inches. And let's do the same thing coming up this way. Come over approximately 4 and 8 inches, or thirds if you want to eyeball it out. Use some brushes. It's kind of, you can really see if you're off if you hold something down. Okay, again, this doesn't have to be perfect. So here we have a little grid. We're going to use this to help us place elements in our painting today. Our owl is pretty much right in the center with its body kind of leaning over, and this horizon line here where the ground meets the sky fills perfectly in to this upper third. Once you have your grid on, go ahead and grab for me a bristly fan brush or a nice big brush. Let's go in for one of these medium grays. Remember, our dark gray was equal portions, blue and brown. This is that gray that has just a little bit of white, so it's kind of a charcoal gray. And whether it leans a little bit on the blue side or a little bit on the brown side doesn't really matter. But let's come across the bottom here. And in the center third is where our owl is going to sit. The owl's head comes up about halfway. So let's pull in a little arc of this dark paint so that it surrounds the owl's head. We need to have some dark elements in our painting to help pop out the really light ones. And then I'm going to put in 2 medium gray dark dollops. We're almost going to get like a little hump, like 1, 2, 3 for the trees and the owl's head. Like 1, like this. In our background. These dark forms will be some trees. This is going to be a little bit of dark, moody gray sky to help pop the white owl's head out. Rinse your brush. It's going to be a subtle color shift in the sky and really soft, but this is how I block it out to ensure that that owl pops. Rinse off your brush for me and just tap it off gently on a napkin. Let's come into a light gray. That's like this one here. So your neutral gray with some white. And if you like your sky to shift a bit blue, just touch your blue and you can make it blue. If you like your sky to shift that more neutral or brownish gray, just add a bit of brown. You can even add little bits of both. Any neutral color will do, as long as we get the values correct. So this is one of those kind of medium values. I'm wrapping some of my paint around my edges as I go, but I'm working pretty quick because we want to blend this together wet in wet. So I'm just going to flap this on. And now it's time to pick up our mop brush and soften this together. So big fuzzy mop brush. I'm going to start in the darks and I'm just lightly, almost doing a little swooping mark. You can tap too, it doesn't matter. Just start in the darks, okay? And up we go. Up we go. Maybe grabbing a little bit of a lighter color. Any of your light colors at the top. I find mixing these together gives it almost like a neutral, like opalescent feel. So getting that blend down. Now my brush, because I have dipped it in the paint, is full of paint. I can't blend with a brush full of paint, so I'm gonna maybe rinse. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean, but I want most of the big stuff gone. And I'm gonna soften the line where these colors meet just a little more. Just with a gentle tapping. So it should look kind of soft and misty. You can tap or pounce. It's a stormy, snowy sky. And once you've got it softened together, here's mine up close. You remember that first dark color we made that is almost like a black? You can use a mop brush or a sponge. Let's play with our sponge. And let's block in two trees where they sit in the composition within these outer thirds. So if I put these lines in to represent these thirds, they're going to sit in this area, okay? My favorite way to use a fan, and I'm working quickly because I do want to blend this wet and wet. I'm going to grab my little sponge like this, and I'm going to dip it into some of that dark color. But then I'm going to come to a clean area of my palette and tap it off, or on a napkin, like just tap it off so it's not so loaded with paint that it won't show its beautiful texture. A light load, and let's create like a little tree here. And one over here. You can try pulling up, tapping, dragging. Just going to try to stay out of this section a little bit. Some soft trays. If you want to reuse your sponge, you will need to not let it dry out. So I typically plop mine in my water until it's time to use them again. And I like to have a couple sponges to work with a few different colors. So I also like to come into, I might take a medium value of this gray and add a little blue to it. I want this to be kind of one of these bluey gray colors. And you can see here, I've gone with this color. Here it is on the sponge. It always looks a bit different on the palette than on your tool or on your canvas. And I'm going to go from that darker color to some of this medium bluey gray, kind of towards the frosted tip. So I'm just going to overlap it. Again, this is just a subtle shift of color. Doesn't have to be drastic. Maybe drag a little along the horizon line just to clean it up. And again, I am trying to work quick enough so that we can still do some wet and wet techniques. Finally, if you want to do any softening of your background, you can take your mop brush here. And sometimes I'll just lightly, with a dry brush, lightly, I'm holding this far away so I can just lightly feather the edges a little. Anything to get that soft, misty look. with just hints of texture. Okay. And do any kind of last minute tweaks that you want. You should see some dark distinction in the bushes in the back. Okay, the wet on wet blending portion is over. I'm gonna spritz my paints. Grab my favorite painty day beverage. I've got some herbal tea today. I'm gonna spritz my paints before we move in to the snowy field. I'm covering up my painting so I don't get any water droplets on the wet acrylic while it's drying. So the field has a few subtle shifts in color as well, including a shadow under this really kind of dynamic perspective in the fence, really coming towards us, receding all along a diagonal off into the distance. So we're going to use some of the colors in our background to help us map this out. So we want to cut off this very sort of specific space for the shadow portion of the fence, the cast shadow from the fence. Where we place the shadows around the fence is going to be helpful for making sure our owl sits centrally in this canvas. I'm going to use a bright brush to begin. And I'm going to start with a medium gray. And I keep pulling my neutral gray into some more white to mix my medium grays here. If you ever run out of your dark color, like the darkest value, remember it's just equal parts ultramarine and burnt umber. And if you want a more blue color or a more brown gray, you know how to shift that just by adding little pinches in there, okay? So I'm going to take, here's dark, middle, light gray. I'm going to take one of these middle grays and plot the trajectory of our fence. So here we have our thirds in here. So where the fence comes off on the bottom here, where the shadow will be, it comes, here's the central third, about over to here. And it comes almost all the way up to the top right here of our horizon line. So if you draw a line kind of cutting through this corner, this is going to be for the ground. I might even more of a drastic angle. So let's go like this. So we want to see a little bit of this corner and coming down almost 2/3 of the way over the bottom. This will be for the approximately where this line is going to be. And the other part of our fence, when we're ready, will come all the way off into the corner down here, kind of coming just cutting off the tip of this central third, and then really opens up like this. And then our owl will be sitting right here. Okay. We'll clean this up later. This isn't our exact fence line, but this is going to help us place some of the background colors around the owl. Let's begin with a little bit of this phthalo blue, and let's make it a little bit darker than the super pastel. And we can use this as a little bit of an indicator for where our fence is going to be. I'm using my bristly fan. I'm using the whole fat side of it, just pulling some shadow lines under our fence. Maybe a little bit of a medium gray in there too. And you can just tap your brush clean in between colors. You don't have to clean it every time. I'm going to take a really, really light brown where we get some of the highlights over here. So you can see the splatter snow shows up all over this painting. So if I had any actual pure white in the background, we wouldn't be able to see that. So I want you to do the same with me today. So I've got some blues and some grays. Now I'm going to tap any excess paint off my brush, and I'm just going to lightly pull these together. Ooh, that's dark. I didn't want any of that pure saturated blue, which I got in there by accident. So I used a little bit of brown to help gray out the blue. The brown will gray out any blue you put on your painting today. So if you do something similar, right, our shadow. You can always add more highlights later. I'm just going to keep this lightly soft looking. Rinse off that fan, tap it off on a napkin, come into some of our brown color, light brown. And let's kind of wiggle it into the fence area. If you look at the owl quickly for me, you'll notice that the owl's body is in shadow. The light is coming from behind the fence, which is why the shadow is on this side of the fence. The light is always on the opposite side of the shadow. So the owl's kind of head and back are being lit by the sun. It's coming from behind, so its belly is in shadow. So we really want to have this snowy area, this field, quite a bit lighter than the actual shadow side of the snowy owl. That's going to help pop it out. So let's start with some of the warm brown. And I'm just using my fan brush to lightly, kind of, you can use it vertical like I'm doing, or even the fat side, depending on the mark you want to make. I'm going to wiggle it together, wrapping some color around the side as I go. So let's keep this area light, but not quite pure white. We want all our snow, falling snow, to show up. So some light brown around here. And then let's take some light ultramarine. Whoops, that's some phthalo in there. Maybe add a bit of brown to neutralize it a little. I'm going to take some of this really light ultramarine up here. I'm going to wiggle that in there too, along the top of the painting here. Maybe make it a little bit darker right along the top. Having some of the warmer snow color, and you can layer these right on the canvas. One thing I want you to do when you get up to the horizon line there, let's keep that line nice and soft. So you might want to rinse off your brush and just use a clean, damp brush. Oops. Or even add a bit more of the wet gray to keep that line looking nice and blurry. So I've added a little bit more wet gray along the horizon line. So I could take my fan brush and do a little wet and wet blending by pulling some of this light color up. Okay, so you could take one of your medium grays like me in here if you need to help keep that line soft. Pull it in and then rub it out with a clean, dry brush, pushing some of that light color up or pulling it down. There we go. Sometimes I'll even take my fan brush right where these shadow colors are and start flicking up like this. This is where those grasses are going to be growing both in behind and in front of the fence, right along the border of the shadow of the fence. So give yourself a little bit of a pattern to follow. If we were to make this blend perfectly smooth, it's a little bit harder for our imagination to start plotting out where the grasses are. If you give yourself a little insinuation of some texture, it's way easier to start adding texture on top than if we had already a perfectly smooth gradient. So you should just roughly be able to see this shadow line for our fence. Okay, once we are here, subtle shifts. We have our background ready to roll. While this is drying, I like to come in and maybe add a little bit of fun texture into the distant trees. So we can try adding a few of our little whites on there. You can use a sponge. You could use a whisk brush. I've got my sponges sitting in my water. I'm going to rinse them out. Dry in this napkin. And I'll show you some fun ways we can add a little frosting, little icy tips on these distant trees. Try either a sea sponge, I just clean this one out, or a mop brush. I'll start with the sponge, just like before, and dry it off a little. I'm going to come into some white or almost white, like some really light blue. I'm going to tap off on the palette so that it's not going to create a big solid mark. We want to see some of the texture of the sponge. And then let's lightly kind of stamp it on. So light, just the most gentle touch. You may even want to tap off on your palette just a bit more try to find an area of your sponge where you get a really nice mark. If you've gotten too dark, just stop and use a clean, damp brush to help kind of soften it in. So if you do get a really, really stark mark, this is just a sea sponge. Artist sponges and sea sponges are the same thing. I've seen a couple people asking. You can even tap a little bit, like if there's a little bush on the horizon line that's picking up some snow. Really fun, really subtle. Oh, I wanted to show you the mop brush too. So it also creates really fun textures. Look at this. We're going to do it the same way, where I'm going to take this dry brush and I'm going to just dip it in the tip. So you should see the paint kind of just picking up on the hairs like this. That way, if I stamp it down, see the texture I'm creating? I don't have any dark paper, which is why I'm using my hand here, but this will also create that really soft texture, okay? I'm doing this so light, like I was trying to brush a little bug off the surface without harming it. And if you're unsure, you can practice on scrap paper. Again, you'd have to have a dark color paper. You could also practice on the side edges if you're like, I don't want to go on the front. I'm unsure what kind of mark this is going to make. Yeah, you can totally utilize those edges to play around in. Oops, little thumbprint here. Yeah, so keep it at the tips, and this will kind of help shape up the trees a little bit. The last element of our background, or we finished the background, we're doing kind of some background tweaks, is going to be pulling in some of the grasses in behind the fence. So if you look here, there's some kind of coming in behind the fence, and then later on we'll pull some in front of the fence. I like to get in there now and pull a few in the background. That way they'll be there. We can layer the fence on top. Okay. It's time to mix our first warm color. Against all these neutrals, the warm color might look a little bit overt, maybe a little bit too obvious, or too much contrast with this bright warm brown. We will be mirroring this bright warm brown in the owl's breast. So stick with me here. We're gonna make my favorite brown. I love mixing neutrals. They're critical for landscape painting of all kinds. You could use plain burnt umber brown, but this brown, you can make such a wonderful variety. I want you to start by mixing an equal amount of cadmium yellow, medium hue, and prism violet. Do not use dioxazine purple to get this warm brown color. It won't work. It will turn it gray instead of warm brown. You have to have prism violet or another really warm violet color, okay? So cadmium yellow medium, prism violet equal amounts. Look at this beautiful warm sepia brown. If I wanted to make this darker, I would add more purple, and then it goes almost like a burnt umber color. Okay, so there's basically our own homemade burnt umber brown. Let's take that equal mix and add a little bit of white to it. And you can see a beautiful sepia color. Just a little white. If we wanted to make this a little warmer, add some more yellow to it. Oops. Didn't mix my pile very thoroughly there. A little yellow and a little white, and we get this really warm yellowy brown. And there's that same yellowy brown with some white in it. So this is the plain color, and this is the only color you need to mix. If you want to play around with adding purple and yellow and white to the mix, you can. But we're primarily going to be using that equal mix of purple and yellow to create this sepia color here. Add a little bit of white to it, maybe a bit more yellow to help it stand out around the background. But that equal mix, ever so slightly heavy on the yellow. These are for some grasses that are peeking through, so the exact color isn't going to affect the outcome of your painting. Like if yours is more purple or more yellow, it's going to look lovely. We're going to come along this grass line, and let's experiment with our script liner and with our palette knife. To use the script liner effectively, I have two here. Oh boy. Look at this one. Okay, so this is sort of your regular everyday script liner brush. Well, some people call them rigger brushes. Like I know in the UK they call them rigger brushes. They're the same. So here is a very long one. And then here, I found this one. This is the longest one I've ever owned. This is a very, very long script liner brush. They're gonna hold a lot of paint, but they can't hold paint at a thick consistency. It has to be fluid. So I'm going to drip some water, taking that equal mix, maybe adding a bit more yellow and a tiny bit of white. I'm going to drip water into a small segment of this paint until I get the consistency as runny as maple syrup. It has to be really runny to flow. That's why ink is not toothpaste consistency. It's a watery consistency just because of that flow. So think about it the same way for our painting. And here we go. So here's my brush, freshly loaded. This is way too much paint for a script liner to make effective lines. If I try to do this, the paint there's just so much on there. So I'm going to dab it off a little. So this brush can go a long way. And we're going to create some curving lines. We're curving this way, of course. The opposite way. We'll be going this way. Got to go a little bit more slowly. We're going to curve up, and then we're also going to curve down and over. So play around. You'll find as the brush runs out of paint, it gets thinner and thinner lines. And so for this painting, we're going to be coming up on an angle a pretty long way along the bottom of that fence. And we also want to have the look of some of these kind of curling over. It's winter time, so they've been in some extreme wind and weather. Wet your brush often and then go back into the paint. You can use the tip like I've been showing you here. I also love using the full side. You know how grasses kind of have tips on them? So if I used a whole part of this brush on the end of some of these, I get like the tip of a grass. And I do this in a really loose, abstract way, where like these are kind of bending down. I just add some really organic marks curving down and then straight. And I let this whole side of my brush kind of just dance and move in that shape of grasses kind of bending and coming up to create this really organic texture. So that's the side of the brush with that same fluid consistency. So remember, the tip of it is going to make really skinny lines and you can curve easily with a script liner. The side of the brush is going to dance like this. I'm kind of tapping up and down to create an organic pattern. I want you to play around with this brush a little bit if you've not used this before. And then let's go ahead and pull some grasses in with our script liner. If your paint isn't flowing, just get it back into the water. Sometimes I'll even just come back in with some plain water and soften the grasses I have. I tend to hold my brush back nice and far. So I'm going to kind of come up along the edge of the fence. We also have some really big long ones growing in front that are coming all the way over like this. All the way over. You have to get the right amount of water. And I have to rinse my brush off about every 2 grasses when they're really coming all the way over. Good practice now because we're going to do some in the pure white later on. I'm going to get some of that pattern in now as well using the side of my brush. So some of these grasses are kind of arcing right over like this. Use that watery paint. Have fun with this. Loosening up today. Loosening up. Before we move on, I am going to show you how to use the palette knife. For anyone that might want to experiment with that for a little bit now. So grab your palette knife, make sure it's a nice flexible knife, and you're going to dip the side of the knife into your color. Let's mix a bit of a color that doesn't have water in it. So palette knife needs the thick paint. I'm going to just tap the side of the brush and I'll show you how it's loaded in a minute. Okay, so look at the knife here. And see how I've loaded just the edge of it? Right here, like that. Just the edge. And this gets beautifully straight lines as well. Skinny lines. Here's me pulling straight. You'll want to load the palette knife each time. And then to curve that line, you just curve the knife. Okay, curve the knife. Curve the knife. So again, some really lovely organic textures with the edge of the knife as well. You don't have to use this, just if you want to. Okay, we'll do more of these in the next segment of our project here. Wipe off your knife if you play with it before setting it aside. The next step of our painting is pulling in the fence. So we want to make sure that this background is nice and dry. It's a great time to spritz your paint if they're out on your palette. Cover your painting or move it out of the way. And then let's give it the blast. If you have a ruler, grab it for me now. While this is, a old kind of wooden slat fence, it's really helpful for keeping the perspective where we want it to be. And I want us to bring back those thirds. When I'm creating a painting, I like to work as effectively as I can. And if I'm working from a reference, like a photograph, like I did for this guy here, then I want to make sure I'm placing my owl where I want it to be. So I often will give myself plenty of guidelines to make sure that everything is tracking where I want it to be. If we make our fence really high or really low, it's going to mean we either have to have a huge owl or rather a small owl. So if you grab a ruler for me, I'm going to use my white chalk pencil. I'm going to sketch that grid of thirds back on so that we can place the foreground element. So that grid helped us place the background elements. Now we're going to use it for our foreground elements. Okay. Go grab that ruler and a pencil. You can use a white watercolor pencil or a white sewing pencil as well. I see a question. Pat says, your script liner is curved. Can you buy them this way? My script liner just sat in the water for a really long time, so they come straight. You don't really want it to be curved. I mean, I don't mind it being curved, but you know, they do come straight, pat, not curved. But if you like a curved one, just leave it in the water overnight and forget to clean it, because they're so long and delicate, they will curve pretty quickly. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to make some little marks at 4 and 8 because it's 12 inches. I'm going to draw my guides back on. It just takes a second. But I grew up with a painter that lived in my attic, and he always said, measure twice, cut once. And I found those to be words to live by. So 2 vertical lines, and then we'll do 2 horizontal lines. And I like to just paint at a nice, relaxing pace. I'm not in any hurry. This is the pace I like to paint on my own as well. Just grab my favorite tea, put on some music, the comfiest clothes I can find in my closet, and just zone out. Okay, so you can really see these horizontal lines here, and those are the ones that are going to help us with that fence again. We're going to grab our bright brush now, the number 6 bright brush, and pull down the line for our fence. We're going to pull down the line for our fence. I'm going to start with the bottom line, which we kind of have a bit of a dark guide for. And we're going to use some of our dark homemade black with just a little bit of white in it. So that'll be one of our really dark charcoal grays. So that's the 1-to-1 ultramarine plus brown with just a little bit of white. So that's our charcoal gray, okay? We're going to start. We've got this center square here. So we're going to come down. So here's that little square, not quite halfway down. And we're going to bring this all the way down. So here's my lower thirds here. So this line is going to come from here all the way down to this third of the line here. So if I were to put this third up here, you can see this lower line comes down to this third here. All right. So from here, just do a skinny line to start. This should roughly coincide with your shadow line, like this. And then I want you to widen the board. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight because, again, this is an old slat fence. It can be all kinds of angles, but we want the angle to be correct-ish. Let it get smaller as it gets further off in the distance. I like to use a bright brush, a nice square-shaped brush because of that flat edge. Now for the top line. This one is important. So if we have this little square here, here's our lower third. okay? Here's our lower third. Look at how the bottom of the board kind of cuts off this little triangle at the tip. We're gonna go with the bottom of the board. So here's my little line here. So it's gonna come pretty much from the corner of this square and just down a little bit. So from the corner, the bottom of this board, gonna come down a little bit. And we want the top of our fence to really run off right in that lower corner like this. It is gonna slowly, I want to have a ruler here, gonna slowly come away. See, I was angling a little bit too far in, so I'm gonna have to paint that out. This is where the ruler is helpful. There we go. It's easy to make things crooked, so I always err on the side of starting straight, because it's gonna get crooked as we come in with the palette knife in the snow. Now, I don't have to paint that out. Because it's still wet, I can just push that line that I don't like off with a clean brush, clean damp brush. You can show paint who's boss. As long as your background is dry, you can just take a clean damp brush, get that line nice and wet, and then I'm going to push it towards where I want it to go. Maybe rinse and clean off your brush if there's any residual paint. All right, so you can clean up any line like this. This grid of thirds is going to help us place our fence posts. It's going to help us place the vertical posts as well. So let's start with the big three. So you'll notice that right here, my painting's coming off a little bit, but this third line here, we've got 3 fence posts in a row. So this one sits to the left of this third line. This one sits so that if I were to cut this middle square perfectly in half, that's where the fence post starts, and we widen it toward the right. So like this. This one too sits roughly in the middle, but a little bit closer to the outer edge. I like to start with this big guy. Use your bright brush. A dark color that's not quite black. So a dark gray, but not your perfect like homemade black, okay? This one's gonna come, and here's my third line. I know the bottom one's a little hard to see, but my third line is here. So you see I want it to come just a little bit up above that line and maybe a little closer to the right. And it really fills the space. It's quite wide. It's really close to us in the picture plane. Now we have this third line here, and we are going to have this fence post here will be coming up on the left-hand side of this line. It's pretty thick, but it's about half the thickness of this really big one because it's further away. And how high up above the horizontal bar we put this fence post is going to be important. We want it to be coming off in perspective. So you can lay a brush or a ruler like this, pinching it so it gets smaller towards the end and lines up with this post here. Then we can roughly block our fence posts in perspective as well. So we're gonna have one that sits right in the middle of my square here. I'm gonna put a line like this, and I'm gonna widen it. I'm gonna widen it. This one runs right off the bottom of the page. Now, this one's technically gonna come all the way up to here, but our owl is gonna be sitting on there, and I found it a bit of a pain in the butt to have to paint out all the dark color. So let's just roughly, lightly kind of sketch in that fence post. And the owl really sits, so it just comes a little bit above the fence, like that. The actual post, again, would come right up to this perspective line, but it's hard to, right? So here's that line. The fence post technically comes right up to here, but the owl is definitely covering that. So let's not fill that whole thing in. All right. And this one. Now, when we get to this part of the painting, we're right here. And I was able to squeeze in 1, 2, 3, 4 more fence posts. They get a little bit closer together as they come along. And let's make, or come away from here. They get a little bit closer together and a little bit skinnier, but just a little bit. Let's use a gray that is ever so slightly lighter than this, or a grayish brown. Because it's a fence, you might want to warm up this gray to make it more of a gray brown. All right, so I want to fit 4 more in. So I might think I'll go like 1, then maybe 2, 3, and then the 4th one's really kind of towards the end. Yeah. Okay. Just long lines. They can be a little bit wonky. It's all good. All right, and here is just the tip of my invisible post where our owl is going to be. Let's finish this fence before we pull on the owl. We've got all our perspective lines are good, so I like to keep the middle clear. Again, our owl is going to fit really nicely with its head kind of perfectly-ish in the center like this. So you can keep these light lines here if you have them. And now we've got to make our fence look like the slats are sitting in the posts. They kind of come in to secure them. And we're going to see them come in on the right-hand side of each post. And the way I like to make that happen is with some shadows and some highlights. So let's take a brush, like a 1/4 inch flat brush. You could use your little fan too. And let's mix a little bit of our really light ultramarine with some of our really light phthalo blue. We can mix our own custom light blue. And really any blue will do, but that's the color that I used. And let's come on top of the fence post. And I might want to make my fence post a little bigger actually. Here's the snow on top. And I think these foreground fence posts, I'm going to widen them up a little bit. So they're like coming in to the fence a little bit. So we could use a little bit of a lighter gray where they're coming in to the fence, and then Actually, you know what brush is absolutely perfect for this is our whisk brush, both for the snow and for the fence. So I'm going to take the snow and some light gray, kind of bringing the fence post over top of the right-hand side. And again, here's where we can get a bit more of a nice grainy look to the wood. So I've got my whisk brush with a little bit of a lighter gray. So I can fill it in, but I can also drag it through like this. Okay. And then this side of the fence post is in front. And just on the right-hand side, it's gonna come in like this. So take that light gray, bring your fence post in, or the horizontal slats into the vertical posts. Again, you can have some little wibbles and wobbles in your fence here to make it look more like an old farm fence. Then we can add our snow on top, also kind of coming in. I start with the blue as the shadow color for the snow. You can even pull the snow on in a wibbly line. And we're going to do that for all of them. So overlapping just a little bit. Same thing with the ones down below. So it's going to come in on an angle and then straight down. You can add some streaks and then some snow on top. A small little bit of snow. You might want to switch to a smaller brush when you're back. Here, adding in that snow, I like to. So I use the light color in the snow to show where the slats are coming in, again, on the right-hand side of the post, both on the top and the bottom. And then I've added some texture and shadows in both the black and some light colors, streaking it in to the fence to give it an overall kind of wooden texture. And the black will help create a shadow where these are slotting in as well. All right. I like to use a little brush to start for the black, like a 0 round or a little flat. Add a little bit of water into some of your black just to help it flow. Remember, when we want those streaky deaky lines, that consistency, that fluid consistency is really nice. So you're going to have a little shadow right here, kind of right around where this is slatting in, maybe a little bit underneath. And you can even pull some little striations in with, again, you don't have to have a whisk brush to create this streaky look. You can just use some fluid paint and a little round brush. And I'm going to do that here. clean up the left-hand side of the posts. So just a little shadow where they come out. Some vertical streaky deakies. Okay, here's mine up close. So once you've got the blacks kind of giving that bit of a shadow where these come out, and the first three really matter the most. The back ones are so far away that it's not quite as visible as these ones. We're going to add a couple other details in here. I like to come in with a lighter gray and tint it with some brown. So starting with the neutral gray like this color and adding that bit of brown to get kind of a brownish gray. That's a little bit lighter than the fence posts. Add some water, and here is where I do like using the 1/2-inch whisk brush. I add a little water to the paint just to help it flow. And I like just streaking a little bit in here. Through here. When you get to some of the smaller sections, you might want to use a smaller whisk brush. You might have to switch to your 1/4 inch for the posts that are further away. These little guys. It's subtle, but when working with neutrals, I do really think it's all about these lovely textures that we make. Another thing I did is I took a little bit of that homemade sepia brown, that equal purple and yellow, and I streaked some of that in here too. You can add a bit more purple. I just pulled this in the vertical posts. Oops, I want the dark version of this color. Get some fun texture in there. And then let's get some white onto the posts, all of them except for this one. Remember, the owl is going to be covering over the top of this post. You can use either a palette knife or a brush like a mini fan, and I'm really going to load the tip and pull on a mound of snow. And then even streak down a little bit, like the snow's coming right over on here too. So I've gone almost in pasto style where it's quite thick. Can let a little bit of the blue show through. Don't forget, we're not going to cap this one, but now we're getting that first pure white in the painting. So you can see that while this snowy field is white, it's not as white as the biggest mounds of snow in the foreground here. We only have pure white in the fence and a little bit in the owl's face and the falling snow. So subtle shifts in value for these whites. And we're going to keep talking about value when we pull in that owl. Cap the tops with big dollops of snow, like it's been a blizzard, and I don't know if anyone out there gardens, but I love plants that have like a strong like skeletal system or seed pods, because in the winter they create like little round poofs of snow. And one of my favorite plants is the hydrangea for that. It has really strong stems, and I have one called an incredible. It's got these huge balls and they get covered in snow. But all plants are covered in snow. Some like little white wisps. I love the way it sits on fence posts. Like you want to just go knock it off, be the first one to walk in it. Or sometimes it's too pretty and you don't dare knock it off. You can play with subtle textures, like once you've got them on, like with the whisk brush. Sometimes I'll just pull it down a little bit with the whisk brush into the post below. So if there's been some wind blowing, you can get snow sticking right to the sides of the fence as well. So if we take a brush, either a fan brush or a whisk brush, and let's go into some pure white for this, okay? I'm going to use the tip of a wisp, but you could use a fan too. And say, you know, some snow is kind of blown into the edge of this post. Just a light load of paint, okay? So I'm not like, it's not gobbed on, just a little kind of sticking to the edge a little bit. Now we only have one more step here before we go ahead and pull on our owl, which is going to be to pull those grasses that are growing up in front of the fence. I don't know about you, but already having some of these darker textures to work with really helps my imagination take hold of the idea that there's going to be some texture here. We could even highlight some of these and incorporate them into these foreground grasses. I recommend that you dry your fence before we go ahead and pull these on. And we'll want to make sure our background is dark enough. Now this background is even darker than this one, so it doesn't have to be as dark as this. You can see the white even shows up on these really light colors. We do want it dark enough that these long grasses are really going to stand out. So let's give this a blast with our blow dryer, maybe spritz our paints. We're going to get into the third last element of this painting. We're going to finish the grasses the fence elements, the grass and this little fence here. And then we're going to get into the owl and then the splatter snow. So 3 elements left, you guys. If you have a little blow dryer, turn it on hot and let's move it all around. We're going to use our script liner and palette knife skills again. Remember, for the script liner, it has to be watery. I'm going to add a little bit of white and maybe a little extra yellow to some of this brown. So this was the perfect mix of Prism Violet plus yellow. This is Prism Violet plus yellow, a little extra yellow, and then a little white, just to make it a little lighter. And the more fluid the color, the better. Think about it like an ink. Think about it like an ink. The white will just help it pop on top of the fence. Now I'm using my script liner itself to add the water I need into my paint, which means I'm going to rinse it off before I use it and dip it in so it soaks up all that juicy color. And then here we go. You can see the grasses. Some are coming all the way over like this. Some are arcing down, and you can get really fast and fluid with these. One of the biggest eye-openers for me with painting was getting comfortable with loosening up my style by adding textures. So what I found is that one line on a plain background can look ridiculous in a composition, but a lot of lines, the minute you have a number of anything, it starts to look like it belongs, which is why I encouraged building up the textures right into the background as opposed to a smooth blend. So as long as you have enough of something, like a texture, it looks like it belongs. Even if your texture is different than mine, if you have thick grasses, but you have thick grasses everywhere, it looks purposeful. I'm going to pull some long ones in the foreground, arcing up and over. And then maybe some little ones. I'm just going up and down, loosey-goosey. Maybe a few more of these in that lighter color that are arcing down. And once we have some on with our lighter sepia color, we're going to do the same thing with some white. And again, this will be one of the pure white elements in the painting. So go ahead and drip some water into some white. Make it that ink-like consistency. And the ink-like consistency. And then I find if I go too fast, it works against me. I find if I go nice and slow, it works out a little better. And I might start just arcing down with some of this weight. Even using the side of that script liner to thicken up some areas, making it look like the tops of grasses. And you can utilize your palette knife here too. I just got totally into that script liner. Forgot about my other favorite tool for lines. The palette knife will get even thinner ones a lot of the time. And you can have as many or as few of these as you like. Maybe even scrubbing in a little highlight. And the snow too. Take as much time as you like pulling in the grasses in the foreground. When you feel like you're finished, it's time to draw and paint our snowy owl. If you have never drawn or painted a snowy owl before, it's a great time to learn. And drawing is great practice for understanding composition, for learning to break things down into basic shapes. And when I hear people say, I can paint, but I can't draw, it always makes me smile a little bit, because when we paint this shape, we are painting a rectangle. When we paint this shape, we are drawing a circle in paint. So paint just means we're using a wet media. But when you make a circle shape, it's the same motion. So whenever we train ourselves to create circles, rectangles, triangles, then we are using the same part of our brain for both of those activities. So I find that drawing is really excellent for helping us become better at painting. Even if you don't paint figuratively, it's a really helpful tool. This particular owl breaks down into mostly circle shapes. So the head is a circle and the body is a circle. And this little guy's really kind of hunched into himself because he's cold. You know, birds kind of pull their heads into their bodies. So let's take a peek at these basic shapes. Grab some scrap paper and a pencil if you want to follow along. We're going to begin with a circle shape for the main body of our owl. So let's say here's our post, and here is our circle shape. So a little circle shape for the body of our owl. And then we're going to do a little line up the center of our circle. The head, okay, so here's the main body of the owl. If I were to draw a little line just on the outside of the edge of this circle, and I'm going to darken the line of the circle that I'm going to use. So draw a line straight up. Then also draw a line just on the outside, because we want the head to be a little circle that comes just a little bit away from the body. So if I draw a little circle on top of my owl, kind of like a little snowman, the center line should really just touch the outer edge of the circle, and the head itself should come just a little bit out of the body like this. That allows us to bring the chest down and into the body. So to connect the breast of the bird, we come down like this, just a little arc that connects the head to the breast of the bird. And then we'll get right into the face. We're going to divide our circle in half. This is where the beak sits, and there's this kind of little shadow underneath the beak. So the beak is going to sit right in that halfway point, and it's going to be a really long, kind of skinny triangle shape to represent the beak. The eyes of the owl, I want you to represent as just two kind of little squinty ovals. And we'll darken them up with the paint. We'll just do the basic shapes. And then you're going to sit kind of just on top of the beak. While you can't see the forehead, there is kind of an angled line. This makes the owl look angry, like angry eyebrows. But this just represents the direction of the forehead. There's a little forehead that comes up and a little shadow that comes underneath the beak right here. I'm gonna get rid of that center line for now. So that's this little shadow underneath the beak, kind of right here. These lines just represent the direction we're gonna pull our paint like in the forehead. Okay. Then right under this line, you're gonna do another little line, just kind of like the neck of the bird. And that's all the details in the face. There'll be some little spots up here, and of course some pupils in the eye. I'm just going to show you the basic shapes for the body. We're going to draw the line of the wing right here, which really starts right in the middle of the face and swoops right across the owl's body like this. Oh, my kitty. Hang on, give me one second. Come on, kitty. Come on. Okay. She likes to be all up in the painting. All right, so the wing, this wing is going to swoop over the circle like this. And the back of the bird is going to sit up here. So another little circle like this. And we're going to connect it like this. So you're going to draw a little line like this. This is sort of the back of the bird. It's going to come up a little bit out of this original circle shape. And the wing is going to come straight off. If you draw a little, like a soft triangle shape for the wing coming off the back of the circle like this. And we'll have another one down below, which will represent the tail feathers like this. The breast of the bird will sit here. And we'll be doing a little detail in the feet. So instead of like a circle shape at the bottom, we're going to flatten it a little bit and angle it up into the body. This is where the feet are going to kind of come out, big floofy toes over the fence post. And that's going to be the basic shape of the owl. We'll do that all again on our background, making sure that it's nice and dry. You can use a white chalk pencil or a dark pencil to sketch this on. It's up to you. So here we go. If you were to draw a line, here's that upper third of our painting. And if I were to pull this little third in like this, our circle shape sits right below this line, and the other circle sits on top of that line. So here's my third line here. So the lower body of my owl, I'm going to draw a line kind of straight up and out of my post here. And underneath this line here, I'm going to draw the circle, the main circle of the body. Okay. I can use a darker pencil if that helps. There we go. Okay. So here's a line kind of coming straight up from the lamppost. And your circle will either fit in this line or overlap it just a little bit. I'm stopping kind of just a little bit above the fence post. So let's do a little circle there. And then we want the head, remember it's going to come just a little bit. If I were to put this little pencil just a couple millimeters outside of the body, because we want the head to come over just a little bit. So let's draw another circle, small circle. And our head should roughly be in the center here, give or take. Doesn't have to be perfect, but roughly in this third up here. Let's draw this little circle. Okay. And you can draw that line that cuts the face in two. And that little tiny triangle for the beak. Okay. The eyes are going to sit on either side of the beak, just sketching a little oval shape for now for me. Like this. And under the beak, there's this little kind of shadow that comes up like this. I know it looks funny in the pencil because the value is really dark, but it's going to be a really subtle line when we fill it in, okay? And then the top of the neck really sits just below. So another line coming across. Again, I know it looks funny in the drawing, but these are just to represent parts we're going to shade in more like properly. Okay, so pretty much from the neck point here, we're going to pull out the breast, the owl's breast like this. Flatten the bottom of the circle for where the toes are going to come out. I'll use my white pencil for these toes. Toes are going to come out on top here. And at the top of the circle, come again to this line here, come across. He's kind of pulled his head in a little bit. So this is the back of the owl coming out like this. And it's a little shape that kind of comes right into the center line here, like this. It's kind of a little loaf kind of shape that connects right up into the bird like this. The back of the bird. The wing crosses the center of the circle and really comes more towards the beak. And it's going to sit right here. So starting in this lower circle, it's going to sweep across the body. And you can connect to the back. We've got a little shape kind of like this for where the wing comes off. And then the little tail feathers are going to be another similar shape. It comes out like this. Here's the line for the wing. The breast of the bird is going to be right here. And the rest we're going to do with the paint. So these are just going to be some guidelines for us to help place the owl. Now, one thing I like to do before filling in the owl is to take a brush like this Filbert brush, and I'm going to take a little bit of my really light brown color. I'm going to scumble across. So I'm going to kind of load the whole fat side of this brush, and I'm going to scumble across. Actually, I'm going to use my little fan brush. My mini fan, where are you? We're going to lighten the snow a little bit around the body to help keep the values tracking correctly. You want a nice brush that we can scrub with. One of my faves is that mini 10-0 fan. There it is. So you can add some water to your paint. And let's just add a little bit. Just lighten that snow just a little bit. Use a clean, damp brush that you can scrub with just some water to help keep that line soft at the top, okay? Now you don't have to do this, but I found adding a little extra lightness with some see-through paint really helped pop my owl's body. You can use water to just keep that soft, just scrub it up. Okay. I want to do the same thing down here with a bit of more of that warm color of snow. Okay. Add water so that it's almost like see-through the paint. I'm going to bring it up, and then I want this line to be super soft. So I'm rinsing my brush off entirely, and I'm using that damp brush. Whoops, wanted some brown on my napkin. Dry it off on a clean napkin. And I'm using my damp brush just to blend this light color up. And it's so see-through, you can see all my colors below. So just watery paint, but having this value really light is going to help bring the shadow side of the bird's body into focus. The shadow color of white largely depends on the atmosphere around. So if it was golden hour and sunset, the shadow of the white bird wouldn't be a blue-gray. It would be a warm brown gold color because the white reflects the light around it. But for today, we're going to go with a blue-gray. So I'm going to take a little bit of phthalo blue, and you can either use a little bit of brown or a little bit of black to make it more of a blue-gray. And so this is when you mix phthalo blue with either brown or black. It's a different gray than the ultramarine, isn't it? So here's the ultramarine blue with the brown. Here's the phthalo blue with the brown. It's a different, almost like a greeny gray. Now we're going to pull a little bit of this shadow color into the belly. Remember, we're going to flatten that circle a little bit. This color, if you squint your eyes, you should definitely see a nice distinction between the snow and this shadow color. The little foot is going to come straight down, kind of off the back of the circle and on to the post. That's the one foot. The other talon is just going to be another little one coming out. Right here, like this. Let's move into a little bit of a lighter gray as we come up. It still needs to be a little bit darker than the snow color, especially when we're painting against the lighter snow background. Remember this line under the head here. So this is kind of where the head is being tucked into the body right here. So it'll be a bit of a lighter gray in the middle and a little bit lighter on the breast here. You can use a little flat or a little whisk brush for this. And we will see that little shadow right here. So let's go for more of a medium gray under the wing and right where the head connects to the body, okay? And a little bit under the wing here. And a little bit of a shadow around the beak. Now, when we're painting in the sky area, it's already a gray color, so this shadow is not going to pick up perfectly until we get the whites on there. But I do like to pull a bit more of a bluish gray shadow, kind of a bit around the beak and under the beak. Like this. So there's almost like a strip of white in between. So that first shadow is kind of coming right here. This is the one under the beak. And then we need a little bit of a bluey shadow around the eye so that the plumage sticks out. So let's get that bluey shadow around the eye. I know it's so similar to the gray background. And then we're going to come into our first white layer. Just give me 1 second. That stormy weather is blowing right into the studio. I always like to keep a window open for some fresh air when I'm painting, but it's crazy out there. So now we can get into some white into the head. So we've got that forehead area that's going to come around the eye, come down the side of the head. Under the eye, around the beak, and then it's going to get a little bit, again, dark right under the beak. So let's leave that dark line and just put a little highlight where the neck is. So right under the head. Adding a little highlight into the chest of the bird, just a little. We have to make sure whatever color we use on the shadow side, it's darker than the snow. So this will be more like a light gray color. The wings are mostly in shadow. If you look at the bird here, we only have, because it's lit from behind, we're really only getting a lot of highlight on the top of that shape. So we'll want to have kind of a light blue gray color, or like a light blue gray color into the wing. Like almost white, but not quite. Like a light blue gray. This wing is going to come up towards this little bit of fur in the neck. It will come around the wing tip. Get a little bit more shadowy under the wing. That light blue gray. In the back. And a shadowy color in the tail feathers because they're sitting really underneath here. So the base coat, the underpainting in the owl, starting to build up the values. This is the hardest part. Once we have the base layer on, it's all about just adding a couple of highlights. So while we wait for this base coat to dry, let's go ahead and add the blacks into the face and really give our owl some character. I'm gonna mist my paints so they don't dry out. Actually, before we do the blacks, let's do the yellow into the eye. Take a little bit of purple, about 3 parts yellow to 1 part purple. So it's gonna make this similar sepia color, but a little bit more on the yellow side, and fill in your eye area with this dark yellow to begin. Deb says, my owl had way too many mice for Christmas dinner. You know, they do tend to poof up quite a little bit in the cold. Like they poof up their whole body. So if your owl is on the rounder side, that's perfect for winter weather. And now we're going to take some plain yellow with just a little bit of white and mix a really light color. And we're going to put a little bit of the lightest yellow into the bottom of the shape. And then take your little 0 round brush and just tap these together. So it's a little lighter yellow at the bottom of the shape. Let's give this a little dry so that we can pull the pupil and black rim around the eye. Make sure there's a little bit of water in some of your black. Use your small little zero round brush. This is the most kind of tiny detail that we have to do today. Make sure your painting is dry so you can brace your hands down. And get a nice dark rim around the eye. Nice little oval shape. And you can put a little pupil in the middle, like this. Runny paint, you may want to tap your brush off on a napkin or your palette. A little pupil in. The beak, just draw a little line straight down and turn it into a really skinny diamond. One more black detail that we have is coming out of this foot. We're going to have one little talon kind of coming out here like this. The other ones are kind of covered in floof. Great. With the face on and underpainting in, we're going to add a few highlights to really pop the owl out. Grab a small brush. Could be a zero round or a little whisk brush. And let's take some, I like to take white that has maybe a little bit of brown in it, but just a little. And we're going to highlight the back of the wing. And the feathers are kind of coming across the back like this. So when I blend in the white, I'm going to blend it in that kind of direction. Okay, this is coming right up into this little layer here. And add a little water into your white. So this neckline, this back comes right up and in. He's hunkered down. Want to make sure that this fades into that little bit of a shadow color down below. Okay. And into the face, I like using a little 1/4 inch whisk brush with some white. And here we can get some of the fun direction of this plumage. So I like to hold it right 90 degrees and just kind of tap in between the eyes. And then remember, we've got that kind of little bit of an angle that comes up into the top of the face. So like the forehead. And if you do little taps so that you can see some of the underpainting below, it won't just look solid white. It'll look like feathers. The feathers come under the nose and swoop out and under the eye, and you can let it be a little bit more shadowed under the eye. Also want to pull some little feathers coming out the side of the head. You can even pull a few little feathers coming in towards the nose. There's tiny little feathers here. Okay, that second coat of white really starts to brighten things up. Can take a little bit of white into the upper part of the breast here. But then I'm going to clean off my brush and just fade it down. I don't want to put white in the shadow side of the belly, so either use white or you can blend some of your gray color back up into this part of the owl. The feathers in the belly, so I'm going to go back to that light gray color, this color here. The feathers in the belly, the direction goes like this, kind of flat across the front and then arcing up and into the body. And while I don't want striations like this, that's the direction we're going to pull our feathers on. So sometimes when I'm trying to create a pattern, I keep that in mind. So when I'm using a color that's maybe just a little bit lighter or darker than my shadow color, I will pull my brush in the direction that the feathers are going. Use a little bit of a darker gray, just a little, to show that kind of indent in the center of the chest. Whoops, that is really dark. Let's soften that in. I might get a little highlight hitting the upper part of the wing, just right here. So this upper section here, and then this is the lower section of the wing. And I'm going to take, again, a medium color to show you the direction that the feathers are coming. So the feathers are coming down the wing like this. And the stripes are going to be coming down that same angle. So when you pull your streaks in here, I want you to follow that shape. You can get a little lighter at the top of the wing, right here. And then it's going to go back to a bit of a darker color. Down here. And because we're lit from above and from behind, that highlight will really come right down the whole kind of back side of the owl. Now for the highlights in the part of the belly that's actually like right curving underneath where the feet are, we'll use more of like a light blue for the brighter highlights instead of the pure white. Okay, so we might get a little highlight. Oops, a little too late. A little highlight in this tail feather here. And maybe a little highlight right at the top of the furry toes. Another little highlight at the top of this little furry toe. I want you to build up your whites. And when you feel like you're happy with this layer, we're gonna go ahead and pull the spots on the owl. The texture is another thing that's gonna help pop the owl out from the background. So if you feel like there might be a few spots on your owl that are still disappearing, then don't worry, the spots are really gonna make this pop. We need to wait for this white area to dry. So while we're waiting, let's grab our palette knives and pull in the white fence in the distance. So make sure the palette knife is nice and clean. Once again, we're gonna load the edge of the palette knife so it's just this side, okay? Just a little bit along that edge. And then we're gonna come along, running that palette knife. One, this is basically like the fence continued. Two. Maybe three prongs of the fence. And then we can pull some vertical posts through here too. While we have our small little brush, let's take some pure white and put the tiniest little highlight, 0 round, in the eye. If you want to do any tweaks of the color in the eye, now is the time. Sometimes I like to come through just with that little pop of bright yellow in the bottom to make them glow. Sometimes I lose my beak a little bit when I'm painting. So pull that beak back in. You can use any number of brushes for these spots. Let's take some plain burnt umber brown. Nice dark burnt umber brown. And I want you to mix it with some purple and some yellow. So this should be a really, really, really dark brown. And there'll be some really dark spots on the wing. They kind of come across this way. And come down on a bit of a diagonal on the wing here. And then let's keep coming down Get on a little bit of a diagonal. Take those same really dark brown and put some dots into the forehead. And I like using a little bit of a lighter, warmer brown into the spots on the breast of the bird. So remember, those kind of come flat across the chest and then curve up into the wing. Little curving up. The final step of this painting is going to be to make it snow. I'm going to take a little paper towel into some water and wipe off my chalk lines. Don't need those anymore. You can splatter with a flat brush. Whenever I want really controlled splatter, I like to splatter with a brush. When I want a whole bunch of fine splatter all over, the toothbrush can be a lovely tool. We're going to take some water into some white, pure white, making it runny, which will help it flow. And then just like you would splatter with a brush, you're going to pull back on your toothbrush. Oh. Don't want this big dollop. And we're going to let it fly. If you do not have a toothbrush, you can of course use a brush as well. My favorite brush is a bright brush. And make sure your paint is runny so we get dots instead of lines. And you just pull back on the brush. Sometimes I'll come a little closer to the tips of the trees and I'll splatter a little bit extra. Again, picking up that frosted tree look. Take your time. The last step. While you're splattering the snow, which has a really lovely uniting kind of effect on a winter painting like this, you can step back and see if there's any areas you might want to tweak a little bit more. Sometimes a little final highlight through the, oops. through the breast or to pop out the wing. Or you can make the snow really thick on the fence if you like that look of raised texture, which I think can look really lovely in a painting like this. When you feel like you're finished, you can sit back, relax, and roll your shoulders because you just finished painting a snowy owl. Now I want you to take your time with your painting. There's no need to keep pace with me. In fact, few people do. And when I'm taking a lesson of any kind, I certainly don't keep pace with the instructor. I tend to watch and absorb what's happening and then kind of work it out on my own. So feel free to use these lessons in any way that you like. Some people watch them through first to get the gist of the steps and then paint it either from memory or with the tutorial in the background. Some people paint along and pause. There's no right or wrong way to enjoy your time with these lessons. When you have finished, I did want to say congratulations on completing this snowy landscape. We've really focused on mixing neutrals and understanding value. You've developed the skill which is really essential for creating contrast and depth in any painting. So if you sit back and take a peek, look at how the white head pops against the gray. And then the shadow side of the belly butts up next to a lighter color. So even though we're using a lot of lightness in our painting, it really comes together by focusing on lights touching darks and darks touching lights. I love playing with these subtle shifts in detail. It is really all about observing tone and how tone can bring out detail in a painting like this. If you are a Kick Academy subscriber, don't forget you can revisit this class at any time, along with hundreds of others within the Kick Academy. This class will be free for an entire week, so also feel free to paint it during that time. I hope you share your painting in our private Facebook sharing group. If you're not a member, I will be sure to post a link below. I make an album for each class that we do, so you can share your work in the album or on the main wall and meet other artists working on these same paintings. We have a lovely, supportive community that you're welcome to join. I can't wait to see your snowy owl come to life. Before I go, I wanted to let you know that I do 2 new classes every weekend. And next weekend, we are going to do something completely different. We are going to be working in a bokeh style where we have a blurry light effect painting the Eiffel Tower as well as doing the annual winter aurora borealis. We're going to play with neon paints in the aurora borealis, and we're going to focus with neutrals and some really fun light effects with the Eiffel Tower. I'll see you next time. Take care. That's it for me. Until next time, I hope you keep it colorful. Bye.